Hello and welcome to this virtual roundtable brought to you by MyCustomer in collaboration with our partners at Opinyin and Freshworks. I'm Chris Ward, editor of MyCustomer, and today I'll be hosting a panel of experts as we discuss how to turn your customer satisfaction scores into powerful insight. In a moment, our guests are going to introduce themselves, after which I'm going to be challenging them all for their thoughts on the benefits of customer scores and how businesses can get better outcomes from surveying, measuring and analysing customer satisfaction. Once I've had time to pitch my questions to the panel, I'm going to open the floor to you, the audience, so that you can put your own queries to our guests. And on that note, I'd like to just take a moment for you all to familiarise yourselves with the dashboard here in front of you. In particular, two things, the survey tab, which we'd like everyone to take a quick look at. If possible, just a very simple question there that we're asking all audience members to fill in at some point through the course of this session. And of course, the second point is the Q&A tab. You can submit a question to any of our speakers or the whole panel by using the Q&A panel at the bottom of the dashboard. And please do submit your questions. We're going to get through as many of those as we can by the close of the discussion. We're certainly anticipating there should be some juicy questions coming our way given the nature of today's topic. So as a quick reference point, I'm going to talk about an article in the Wall Street Journal from May 2019, which suggested that the customer measurement Net Promoter Score is now used as a success metric in a large percentage of big businesses. And the NPS was referenced more than 4 times more in earnings calls in 2018 by the top 50 S&P 500 companies than the 5 years previous. So is this a good or bad thing? Well, the WSJ article that I mentioned certainly guarded against it, suggesting NPS and other customer scores now wielded too much influence in businesses. But if big businesses are being sort of guided by NPS, CSAT and customer effort scores, for instance, how should they be using them and going beyond the score in order to glean meaningful insight? Well, that's what we're hoping to cover over the next 45 minutes or so. So without further ado, let's meet the panelists that will be shedding some light on this topic today. First up, I would like to welcome Rob Lancashire, who is the CEO of Opinyin. Thanks for joining us, and perhaps you could introduce yourself to the audience, Rob.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Rob Lancashire. I'm the CEO of Opinyin, a CSAT survey solution provider that's harnessed AI to read all that lovely feedback for you. Personally, though, I've spent 20 plus years in and around AI technology, starting back in the 90s with speech recognition, the first AI. And over my career, I've held a number of various operational roles, including board responsibility for customer service and success at a large software company. So I'm able to marry the experience of those two together to talk about how technology can potentially make life easier for me, as I wish it had done. Thank you, Chris.
Great stuff, Rob. Also joining us today is customer service and experience author, consultant and trainer, Adrian Swinscoe. Thanks so much for being involved today, Adrian. Perhaps you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're hoping to get out of the session.
Hi, Chris, and hi to everybody that's tuning in. Thanks for having me on this or inviting me on this. As I say, my name is Adrian Swinscoe. I'm a advisor, researcher, kind of an author, and I guess sometimes general all-round troublemaker and poker when it comes to service and experience, because I'm sort of really interested in, organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people, and I'm really interested in sort of exploring kind of what's the best way to do that. And so I think metrics and how we measure sort of feedback or how we gather feedback is a critical part of that. But I see a lot of people that get enthralled to the metric rather than the kind of the whole system and the process, and that's what I'm really interested in exploring sort of today. So thanks for having me.
Great, thanks, Adrian, and yeah, we'll certainly be getting into the meat of that, and I think a bit of troublemaking will aid conversation too. And so last but not least, we're delighted to have Marion Escudé who is Customer Success Manager at Freshworks with us. Marion, great to have you with us today. Perhaps you too could introduce yourself to the audience and what you're hoping to discuss today.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Super happy to be with you today. So my name is Marion, and I've been working as Customer Success Manager at Freshworks for the last 2 years. Yesterday, actually, I celebrated the second anniversary. And basically, I'm accompanying all of my customers using Freshdesk, which is our ticketing tool for support agents. And I'm part of this webinar today because one of the different axes of work that I'm discussing with my clients is also the CSAT, what to do with it, how do we track it, how do we use it. And it's usually part of bigger discussions. And this is why I felt it was very interesting also to get to understand what other people have to say, like experts. And also I'm very interested in knowing what we can do about like AI, and if it's actually really something I could push to my client as a consultant for them.
Great stuff. Thanks, Marion. And let's get into some of those bigger discussions, if you like. Just before we sort of start debating some of the areas of this topic, I thought just as a scene setter, Rob, I'm picking on you slightly here, but perhaps you could just talk through, given your expertise and what you do at Opinyin, what are the sort of most common customer scores used by businesses that you see, and perhaps how they are most commonly used.
I mean, the most common one, I think you've already touched on this, that gets talked about is Net Promoter Score. That's how likely are you to recommend. But we do also see a lot of what is technically termed CSAT, which is the how satisfied are you. And there's another one as well, which is Customer Effort Score, which there is various research around that suggests that particular score is more reflective of loyalty. The one thing we do see, though, with all of these different types of systems is there's a tendency to ask too many questions. When you consider there's a lot of competition for the customer's attention, and that's ever increasing, ask too many questions and you will start to affect your response rates. We're also seeing, though, a lot of these types of surveys, they tend to focus on the things that are important to the business. So they have a list of stuff that will be important to the business, but not necessarily important to the customer. And really the final point I would make in terms of what's out there really is that there's this obsession with the scores, which I know we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, let's get into that bit first. Perhaps, Adrian, we could start with yourself, because there is that broader discussion, debate to be had. And I know it's hotly debated in the customer experience world about whether customer scores really work. So, Adrian, from your point of view, do you think customer scores are a sort of good way of measuring success? What are the sort of common frustrations seen with them, in your opinion, and perhaps what does success and failure maybe look like?
Well, I think the answer to that question has to be kind of yes and no, because and let's start with no first. I think that one of the challenges, I mean, like you could report it in about the kind of the Wall Street Journal article, which I remember kind of like seeing, and I thought it was actually kind of quite an interesting article, and the idea that you've got all these big CEOs of these big corporations that are kind of reporting out their NPS scores on like analyst calls. Now, they will say that is it's a representation of how kind of good they are, sort of thing. But I guess the kind of question is the question I would always kind of say is like, is it a representation of their effort, or is it just something that kind of reflects what they're kind of doing anyway? Because I think when you think about scores, you've got to think about what do we want scores for? Is that to help us understand how well we are doing, and how well we are kind of journeying along a path. And so I'm slightly reticent and slightly skeptical about some of the reporting of some of these numbers, because it feels like a bit like for want of a better term, virtue signaling. We're in this kind of thing, oh, we have to put a customer at the heart of our business, and reporting your NPS goes like, no, look, we care about our customers. And you're like, do you really? Just because you report a score? And I think we also have to see, so that's on the one side, but, you know, and on the other hand is that we see scores and we go, well, the problem is you end up getting another trap that organizations fall into is they end up chasing scores, and then the scores can be improvement of a score can be a target in of itself, and then that leads to almost like driving the wrong behaviors because people want to gain scores. I'm pretty sure that anybody who's been in a mobile phone shop recently, or rather pre-pandemic, would maybe have encountered a sales assistant in one of these kind of shops when they finished kind of like serving them, and they'd be, you know, I had it, and they said, can we send you a kind of a survey? Oh, and it'd be really great if you could score me a 9 or a 10 on the survey because that really affects my compensation. What can I tell you, right? So some people kind of, because they set these things up all in the wrong kind of like way, it drives the wrong sort of kind of behavior. So I guess it's a quote, I forget the gentleman's name, but when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. It's Goodhart's law, right? And so I think that's the thing about these kind of scores is that we need to make sure that they're a measure, not a target, but also for them to be a measure, we have to have some sort of reflective kind of process around it. It's like, where are we at, what we're measuring, why we're measuring it, and what do we learn from it? Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that because I can keep going on forever.
Well, I mean, that is the danger with this topic, is that, you know, it's so far-reaching. But one thing you mentioned there, which we'll almost certainly come back to, because we've had an audience question around is targets and incentives, which is, you know, another area of metrics and customer scores, which is very interesting. But before we move on to that, Rob, I suppose the same question back to you, given some of the work you're doing. Opinyin, did you work with clients that are sort of using customer scores in some of the ways that Adrian's mentioned? And do you think customer scores work as a sort of basic metric?
Yeah, I echo very much what Adrian has just said. I mean, they're a useful point in time, short-term measure, but they do have, scoring ranges have issues. Adrian's already highlighted one quite key one, which is gaming. But we see things such as misunderstanding. It's actually quite common to see people get the ranges around the wrong way. Plus also there's psychological bias attached to scoring. And the famous one, and my favorite, is what I call the NPS 8, which is where someone once said to me is, you know, I don't give anybody more than an 8. Well, if you're familiar with the NPS system, that breaks that system instantly. So even if someone loves you, they'll never give you more than an 8. And these are issues with scoring ranges and the way that we address them psychologically. The other thing about them, though, is they're one-dimensional. You know, like numbers on a P&L, without commentary, without understanding why behind them, then really, as Adrian's just said, and then you need to understand why. You need to put that into context of the whole experience and understand that in terms of what you want to achieve as a business strategically and operationally. So really, yeah, same sort of thing with some other additional key points about scoring ranges. That they have issues.
Yeah, and interesting that we've already talked about, yeah, sort of gaming these systems from both an employee and a sort of customer perspective. You know, within a few minutes of talking about them, which I know is another issue entirely related to customer scores. Marion, I'll just bring you in here at this point, because in your introduction you talked about some of the clients you worked with and how some of the discussions are about how to make CSAT work and whether it's worth having customer satisfaction as a measure in those businesses. So I guess for you, yeah, we've talked about the benefits of customer scores and whether they work or not, but are you actually seeing them being used with your clients, and what are some of the sort of discussion points that you're having?
Yeah, that's an interesting point because so I have a. Can you hear me? Can you hear me properly?
We can, yeah.
Sorry. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Different types of customers. Sorry, there is a slight delay. But yeah, I have different types of customers. Of course, I have the one that do not track CSAT at all. Probably because it's not in their priority, because they don't have the resources at the moment to focus on this point. I have also like the customers that are tracking just a little bit, but they don't actually know what to do with the result they track, and they don't know which action to take. And then I have like the one that are tracking quite a lot of things, active action on their processes. So they more use it as an ad hoc sort of things where they identify that they have a pain in one of the area of their business process, and they will create then task force to tackle this issue specifically.
It does look like we might be having one or two connection issues. So apologies, folks. I'm that continuity announcer, if you can still see me.
Yeah, apologies, guys. I hope everyone got to hear Marion's discussion point there. I lost connection on my side for 30 seconds or so. Rob, let's move on to some of the points that I heard Marion discussing there for a second around customer outcomes. What are the sort of common outcomes you see amongst businesses using customer scores successfully?
That's a really difficult question, because a lot of these things are specific to the business themselves and what they're trying to achieve strategically. I think for some people, it's not, as I think Marion was saying, it's not high on their agenda. But what I would say is I kind of understand that. Having, managed teams, historically the support team's often under fire. They're firefighting all the time. They don't really feel like they have the time to do this. They know they should, or they're being tasked to do it. But often they're having to try and do more with less resource. And certainly products like Freshdesk, I know from my own experience, because we're a user of Freshdesk, can help an awful lot with that in terms of driving productivity. But we've all seen what's happened this year and this strange year with COVID, and customers, more and more businesses online, customers are going more arm's length, but we still need to be able to connect with them and understand them. And as we've observed, online meetings aren't always the answer. But I suppose if you ask what are the aspirational outcomes, would be things like business growth, reputational success, improved productivity, happier staff. That's really important, because I was always acutely aware of the burnout of support staff. They burn out ever so easily, and that was something that always worried me. And the tenures are not very long, and you get a lot of churn in staff. It's not somewhere that people want to stay. So it's really about basically the kind of more strategic goals and operational goals that any business has. And if you look at one of the cases that is often cited as a really good example of customer satisfaction, which is Southwest Airlines, the one thing that is always highlighted is that they didn't navel gaze their scores. They went out and they looked at their scores as part of a holistic picture in terms of the overall, their overall customer experience. And it's that which they got right. And that's why I always find it a bit strange when I get surveys from other companies that never ask me why I gave them the score. It's like it's almost presented as an afterthought, the why, and I'm a firm believer that it shouldn't be. I'd much rather ask less questions and ask the customer to spend time telling me why than I would asking them 6 or 7 questions about things that I think are important, but my customer might not care about at all. So certainly these are the sort of things you can achieve as a business if you approach it in the right way.
Chris, can I make a point on that,
Adrian, I was going to say, I know you have some some particularly sort of passionate points around that area. So I'd be keen to know your thoughts as well.
So kind of like I think Rob provides a great example of Southwest Airlines, and they are kind of a lauded example. I mean, so there's two things a couple things I wanted to say about all of that. It's like customer scores in of themselves are not outcomes. They're metrics, right? They kind of make, you could have an NPS kind of score of plus 90 and your business could still be going kind of underwater, right? Because it has no real kind of like, it's not an outcome in itself. It doesn't drive, it might drive some sort of business results. There might be some sort of correlation between having a positive NPS score and kind of growing your business. But actually, if you're not actually focusing on how do you drive essential and the fundamental kind of business outcomes, and then using your scores as a measure of how you're getting on in terms of trying to achieve that, then I think you've got the kind of cart before the horse, as it were. Because it makes me kind of like, and that's kind of why the Southwest Airlines example is really interesting, in that they concentrated on doing the right things for the right reasons and used their scores as a measure of kind of how they were doing against that. I'll give you an example which is a bit closer to home, which is not an example which is often cited in the UK, but I think they're a brilliant example. They're very much under the radar, and that is Coventry Building Society, and they're effectively, for Marion's benefit and everybody else that's listening on the call that doesn't know what a building society is, it's effectively a variation of a type of bank here in the UK. It's sort of owned by its members. Now, they are the third largest building society, I think, in the UK. And over the last sort of 10 or 12, 15 years, they grew at double digits before the financial crisis, at double digits through the financial crisis, and have grown at double digits kind of like every year since the financial crisis. The thing is, they don't have any kind of like, they don't operate with any targets, and they don't do a lot of surveying either. They use it to inform them, to kind of almost take a temperature check of how they're doing. But what they do fundamentally is focused on being very, very clear about doing the right things for the customers at the right time for the right reasons. And they smash it. So they focus on the right sort of outcomes, and they use their metrics just to help them understand how are we doing on that. And I think that those sort of examples show that actually these are businesses that are led by, one, their customers and the outcomes that matter for them, and are not led by survey scores, because strategically they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah, great. And I suppose, strategy is key. Having some vision at the start, and this is something we talk about regularly in the customer experience world. Having vision is such a key part of that. Marion, I'm going to try and bring you back in here. I know we lost you a little bit when you were speaking last time, but from speaking to you previously, I know this idea around vision and outcomes is something that you certainly feel strongly about, and it's something that you've sort of ascertained from the discussions you've had with your clients. So I was just wondering your thoughts on some of the points that Adrian and Rob have raised around vision and strategy and having outcomes from customer scores.
Yeah, basically that's very interesting, because among the portfolio of customers I'm working with, I can see different approaches, which are either it's like what I was saying earlier. It's you gather the CSATs, but you don't really have like a strategy behind. So you just only take like small corrective actions on certain identify business processes that are not working, and so you create like a task force to tackle the issue, but it's not part of a bigger strategy. So first of all, you don't really have the resources and larger amount of resources in order to be able to maybe correlate the CSATs with the processes, and also to relate them to the different departments in order to really get actions from those departments. So most of my customers, they have this approach today. This is what I can see from the discussions we have. And I have like way bigger clients. Maybe it's also part of a maturity process where you can really feel that it's incremented within their strategy. So it means that not only they take major corrective actions, but I saw it be part of every department's OKRs or KPIs, where they are reviewing every week, every month, what are the customers saying about this product, this service they're providing, and they need to actually report and to give actions, and they're responsible for this. So I can see that it's a process that some of my customers are at a certain level of maturity, and others are more like tracking it, because I think now everyone knows that, support and support department are not only cost centers, but they can really drive value and through customer loyalty, and this is great. But I also have the feeling that it's also in the maybe top management mind and decision, where we need to have like kind of a top-down the decision process in order to increment this in everyone's mindset and to have like a really customer-driven company kind of until the end of the customer support process.
Great, thanks, Marion. And Rob, I mean, yeah, how important is it that this is driven into the organisation as a whole? Because I know often we can see that this being, as Marion has alluded to, just being focused in certain departments. How important is it to have the whole organisation behind us?
Well, I think it comes back to Adrian's point about your vision for the business and your outcomes. And if the whole business isn't really, if the whole business isn't aligned on those outcomes, then really you're all pulling in different directions. But I take on board something Marion just said, which I thought was very interesting, which is about the disparity between, how customer service is considered at a board level. And I'm generalising here, but how customer service is considered at a board level and how important it is to the business. As she said, quite often they are considered a cost centre when they're not. They're a profit centre. They're responsible for looking after churn, which, as we know, it's 4 times cheaper to keep a customer than acquire a customer in the first place. I often remember that saying, revenue's vanity, profit's sanity, and cash is reality. Well, satisfaction scores for me border between vanity and sanity if they're just taken as scores. And they're easy for, say, to be produced at board level, and everyone pats each other on the back and says, there's nothing to be done here, when in reality, that's just part of it. And the reality of the customer satisfaction world is to go that extra step and understand why. Understand what it is that is causing people to give you these different scores. And then essentially you're able to start telling the business. And I always used to find I had more success with processes. And the old saying about it's easier to get forgiveness than it is permission is to do something that wasn't very expensive to prove to the executive that I could become a superhero. And then what I'd do is, rather than go and ask them if I could do it, I'd do it, present it to them, and when they all thought it was wonderful, I'd be allowed to get on with it. But it was there is a way here by doing this, and essentially reading the feedback. That's the fundamental thing, is to read the feedback. You can become a superhero, and then you can go to the board, and this suddenly puts your stock in the business way up. And so you can become you get more focus. You can really push the angle that you're a profit centre. And sadly, what I did see was that customer service was often treated as a bit of an afterthought at board level, which was a real shame. And it was sad, because it's the one thing that could make a big difference to the success of the business. So certainly, I'd say, if you want to get away from using a score as that perfect comfort blanket for everybody, start looking at how you can become a superhero in the business, because by reading the feedback and acting on it in terms of the outcomes that the business wants to set, there is a huge opportunity there. And I kind of wish I could go back and do that. But I've got another job now.
Your point, sorry, Marion.
No, and just to add on top of your point, I was also discussing with one of my customers that is working in the telecommunication, and he was saying among all the different sales channels that we can see, like marketing, in-store, online sales, he was like, we can really see like a pattern into the support sales, or where we can see like a churn that is way lower and the loyalty is way higher than any other channel. So it also shows that support centers are also driving values and on a longer term. So this is something that companies should not forget as well. It's just one point that a customer shared with me not so long ago, and it made me think about it. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The point about feedback that was mentioned earlier, Adrian, I know this is slightly provocative, but yeah, are scores without sort of verbatim customer feedback a waste of time? Like what? Yeah, without the being able to analyze specific feedback. I mean, what can a company actually achieve? I mean,
well, I mean, I guess. It depends on what you're actually kind of measuring, and kind of why you're kind of like why you're measuring it. I mean, I think it can be dangerous, yeah, because in isolation, it's a bit like saying you're driving along in your car, and your speedometer says that you're driving along at 30 miles an hour, but it doesn't tell you anything about the condition of the road, right? It could be on like a track on a farm, or it could be on a motorway, and neither kind of like speed would be appropriate for either of those roads, right? And so I guess it's all contextual, And the thing I was kind of like I would turn it on is kind of like, well, also another kind of like place another challenge out to both the panel and the audience, and say that there is this kind of we are in this space where people talk about data-driven decision making, right? That's kind of a big thing, and we all talk like big, lots of data, big data, and all that sort of stuff. And then the more we get stuck in this idea that we get more data is better, and surveying and the surveying industry can fall foul of that, and as kind of boardrooms. And so I would just go back to Rob, given that you are squarely in this sort of space, and say, do you think there is also a problem which says where people get caught up in this idea that more surveys is better, and actually, what that doesn't do is it doesn't. It's not customer friendly, because there's this big thing we're not talking about when it comes to feedback and data. It's like survey fatigue. People are going, oh my God, are you kidding me? Another one? Can you just leave me alone?
Adrian, you make a brilliant... Sorry, Adrian.
How do we navigate our way out of this? Kind of right now.
Yeah, Adrian, I mean, Chris, if I can respond to Adrian there, I mean, you make a great point, and it's one of my pet hates, is when I get and I saw the best one I saw was a customer satisfaction survey that was 45 questions long. I mean, I think I got to the first one and then decided that I've got better things to do with my life. And to me, that's the problem. But this is not necessarily, this is a legacy thing. And it's a lot to do with a lack of resources to deal with verbatim. And as you said, if you reduce the number of questions that you ask, and for me, the utopia is just to ask one simple question, and you can add a score as well, because, we've got that little comfort blanket. Let's keep it there. Let's use it as a stepping stone. But one simple question is, how did we do? Not, all the other questions, but how did we do? And let that person tell you what's important to them. And then use that data to actually inform the process that we are aiming to get. And that, for me, is a key thing. Yet, if you look at a lot of surveys, they often don't even ask for the feedback, or it's a bit of an afterthought at the end that says, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? Which, personally, I don't think I've ever filled one of those boxes out. What we've had great success with, and I personally, this was one of my pet babies, was the fact that I want one question with a box to tell someone what I think's important, and that's it. I don't want to do any more than that. And in a sense, that's a lot to do with the rise in social media becoming a feedback channel, was because of that. But people get really wound up with the fact that, yeah, but if I don't ask about all the various things that are important to me, how am I going to know? And that requires, to my mind, a little bit of faith in what you do. But if someone doesn't tell you you're rubbish or you're brilliant, then you're okay. Now, if you're happy just being okay, fantastic. But that's, to my mind, that's not the way to success. You want to stop doing the stuff you're bad at, find out the stuff you're exceptional at, and do more of the exceptional stuff for more of your customers across their entire journey with you. And by understanding the feedback and reading that feedback, you're able to understand that person at different points in the journey. But I do agree with you, no, you shouldn't survey them all the time. Finding the right engagement point in the journey is critical. So in a sense, that whole thing about verbatim, it really is important. But I do want to share one scenario with you, which is what someone told me was called the toilet smell scenario. And I'm sure we've all been into a restaurant where we've been asked to fill out a customer satisfaction survey. And I bet no one has ever seen on there a question about whether the toilets smell. You'll ask about the food and the service and everything else. No one ever asks that. But yet, if you ask a lot of people why they won't go back to a restaurant, it's usually down to the cleanliness of the facilities, the toilet. And yet restaurants don't ask it. So they might get told it, but the chances are they won't, because they never ask the question. Yet if they just said, how did we do? I bet people would tell them, yeah, everything was great, except the toilet smells. And that's a very simple example of how, if you get out of the way of the customer and let them tell you what's important, you will learn more about, how they feel about you on their journey with you.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that's directly actionable as well, which is the next area that we were going to talk about is how we deliver insight. But on that point, Rob and Marion, I'll ask this question to you. Do you think that perhaps in the experience in your role, do you find that companies perhaps focus too much on what they think is important to the customer rather than letting customers tell them about what is important?
For instance, for me, sometimes I have the feeling that when customers are efforts, thoughts to define what type of experience they want to deliver to their clients, so that's really good. But sometimes I also say, hey, maybe already. Look at the different information you can already find out of the data that you've been already tracking, and that could be maybe a good base point to start thinking and building around it, because it's quite a long process. It's a quite long journey. We haven't seen any companies coming live with the best strategy ever. First of all, because you as a company, you evolve, but also your customer, they see different things. So I usually have.
Oh, I think we're losing you again, Marion. Apologies, Rob, Adrian. I'll just sense check with you guys. Have you lost Marion's feed as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, apologies, everybody. We continue to be plagued by internet problems with Marion. I know she had some great points there as well, so it's quite frustrating, and hopefully we can get it back. In the meantime, Rob, maybe I could perhaps pose the same question to you. Do you think that companies too often focus on what they think is important to the customer rather than letting customers tell them about what it is that's important?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, which is, the toilet smell scenario I was sort of highlighting earlier on. I think you have this tendency to sort of focus on these things which, the customer kind of might shrug their shoulders at. And another anecdote that I heard was someone once said that they'd been and had a key cut at a new key for the front door cut, and got a survey from the company that did the asking them were they satisfied with the key cut, and they kind of went, well, yeah, it now opens the door. And that's that's because that wasn't what was important to them. But that's the question I asked. And that's another good example about, in a sense, getting out of the way of the customer. But I do understand why businesses don't do this, because a lot of the technology that's been around, and I should say there's even one very well-known survey company that actively suggests you don't ask for free text feedback. A lot of that's done down to the fact that historically technology, the tech's not been able to do anything with that stuff. And you may have had a spreadsheet with a load of free text in it, which someone has to read in that scenario, which is not a particularly thrilling job to do. And that's quite important. You know, that's quite a thing. And that's why probably people didn't do it, because they just don't have the resources to read all that feedback and turn it into usable insight. And that's really important in terms of, you know, what you do. And there is a lot of opportunity to make better use of that data with textual analysis, and then marrying it up with performance data, which kind of leads on to what Marion was saying about looking at how linking that analysis, and what Adrian was saying as well, with regards to the whole picture, the outcomes that you want, is linking that with other data in the system, such as if you were talking about a help desk, things like service levels, ticket close times, ticket volumes, ticket types, all the various things that are data that's coming out of the system, which is quantitative. When then married, you can start to bring this data together to look at the journey that the customer is on. And, you know, there's other data, finance data, lead delivery times. There's a whole range of data. You can marry that together. And, you know, one of the sort of big commentators on customer satisfaction, Fred Reichheld, he often talks about the need to connect the quantitative data and the qualitative data together. But I do recognise, you know, we've got to be able to use that textual analysis to be able to get that insight, because I know I haven't got time to read thousands of bits of feedback, and I don't expect anybody else has. And it would probably not be very accurate because you'd get bored. But there are technologies now which can do that, and that's really where the industry is pivoting, because that's becoming possible to do that at scale without needing to spend a lot of human resource on it and get pretty decent results.
I know there are businesses that are still doing that process manually as well. But Adrian, your thoughts here? I mean, how vital are some of the technology pieces and AI, which we're going to talk about now in a little bit more detail? How important are those technologies to actually advancing some of this feedback process and to delivering more insight?
I think they're essential, particularly if you're operating at scale. But I think the thing is, I think so. There's some really good sort of technology that's out there that will allow us to, you know, pick out patterns and segment all the different sort of feedback, and actually kind of and then start to highlight some of the real kind of issues. And I think that it's really important, and many of the developments are really exciting. However, I would also kind of like say that we need to be careful not to just default to let's trust the technology and rely and only the technology, because the technology can become a crux. I think what I'm more interested in is also an idea about getting that balance right, the kind of the behavioural sort of stuff where you can go in and you can jump in, and I'd like to see kind of more leaders and managers actually routinely and ritually sort of like dipping into feedback and sort of connecting with those customer stories, that customer sort of feedback, so they actually start to get a visceral sense of what's going on. Because we talk about, at the board level, we talk about people reporting numbers, but the problem is with numbers sort of move people some of the time, but stories and emotion and insight move us most of the time. And I think that's what, if we get more connected kind of with the data and with the people and the human stories behind it, then I think we'll actually start to see kind of more meaningful action. So we're actually getting to get that balance kind of right, I think.
Rob, can AI do that?
Yeah, I mean, the point I was just going to pick up on something Adrian said, which again I totally agree with. And technology should never lead. you know, the business and the requirements of the business should always lead. And if you look at why do we use textual analysis in the business, it's really a case of these executives that Adrian was talking about, you know, making it easy for them to do that dive really quickly. So in other words, the AI is doing the grunt work for them, because what it's going to do is then start to bring together a holistic view of the experience. One of the things that we've seen, and we see this quite strongly, is that when you send out, say, I don't know, a survey to a group of people, you'll get those people that won't respond, you'll get those people that will respond in a negative way, and you'll get those people who will respond in a positive way. Well, all three of those are data points in a sense of understanding the customer journey, because those people who don't respond, you probably just did what they expected, so they don't feel like they need to. But that's a useful data point. When you marry it up with understanding why the people who are unhappy, and those people who are not, who are very happy, because probably there you've done something exceptional. Now, from a point of view of the business, from an operational point of view, you know, you identify immediate sort of issues like, say, staff training. But from a strategic point of view, and this is what I was coming to, is that if we take something like there's a man originally, well, he was called, he is still called, well, he's not, I don't think, alive anymore, De Bono. And I'm sure everybody's heard of De Bono. But he said, stop doing the stuff that's bad, start doing the stuff that's good, and change the stuff that isn't, you know, that can be improved. But if you stop doing the stuff that makes people unhappy, then use the textual analysis of the feedback to understand what you are doing that is exceptional, then you can change the everyday to make it exceptional for each of your customers. Now, all of that sounds wonderful, but it's not something you can do manually. And this is where AI comes in, because it lets you quickly get to do like root cause analysis of why it is that people are scoring things the way they are. It can aggregate that data that allows you to quickly go in and look at what's going on. And I suspect people have tried it before. I know from chatting to Adrian before that he's had some experiences of it, and it was left wanting. It's a very good way of putting it. And, you know, it's improved greatly in recent years. It can read that feedback at scale and produce a data. So if we go back to my original utopia question, which is how did we do, realistically, you could just ask that question, let the AI read the feedback, and it will generate points for you, which then used in context of the overall journey become incredibly powerful. And we like to think that what it does, it tends to give your, or what it does is it gives your team, gives the support team and the service team superpowers, or we've called them satisfaction intelligence superpowers. But if I go back to my point about how to make yourself increase your profile in the business, these are exactly the sort of superpowers that you can use then to really drive the importance of customer service in the business, in terms of the business and also the executive. And I should also say it will, those unhappy salespeople that arrive in support grumbling about why their customer has not had great support tend not to arrive so often. And that hopefully if we've got some support people on watching this, they might be grinning now, because that was always fun. When it was nothing necessarily to do with the support guys, but they would still be the kicking boy for that. So realistically, AI can do an awful lot of those things. The important thing, and what's really changed, is it's become far more affordable. You don't need to have large amounts of data. It doesn't need the heavy setup, lifting and training. That's all changed now. It really is getting to a point, a bit like speech recognition did some years back, of working from day one for people and delivering good enough value to make it a useful tool in the productivity with something like, you know, like a Freshdesk system. You can plug it in and you'll get good value from day one and good productivity gains. And that's really what it can do today, and that's where it can come into use. I want to make one final point, because I have talked quite a bit about this, is that there's another thing it can do, which is really important on taking people on the journey, and particularly the executive. And we've talked about a bit of an attachment to scores. There is AI can actually produce scores based on what it thinks the person feels, based on what they've said. So it basically takes the verbatim, analyzes it and says, well, based on what they've said, I'm scoring it at this. That in itself is an incredibly valuable data point. Moreover, that it actually deals with the whole NPS issue I talked about earlier on with the score of 8. But what it really does is it provides you an extra data point against a score, which gives you an even better insight into exactly what's going on with that particular customer. But that's the power of AI. It's able to say, well, actually, I can do this, but I can do it at scale. And it doesn't cost you people and feet on the ground to do it. And it's more data that will help make you a superhero.
Mm-hmm. Well, great, Rob. And actually, I think this might be a good time. This might be a good time to move on to some of the audience questions. And we've had a fair number, so we'll get through as many as we possibly can over the next 10 minutes or so. But to your point there, Rob, and I think this kind of connects to it nicely. We had a question from Jerry, who says, how do you stop the influence of employees and whole departments gaming customer scores? And I know we talked about that earlier. Technology, I suppose, it may well be part of the process of avoiding that issue of gaming customer scores. But yeah, I mean, hands up anyone who wants to answer that one in particular. I thought it might be and Adrian. Well, I'll ask Adrian first. Your thoughts on that one.
I mean, I think the thing is that when you're going to get, for me, I would say that if you start setting targets, when you have individual kind of targets that are when you have targets that are ascribed to kind of individuals, that's linked to kind of customer outcomes, and if they're not shared and they're just all down to the individual, then that's going to drive certain kind of behavior. There's no shared responsibility of that. And I actually think that if you're going to use customer outcomes, and particularly kind of like scores as a way of measuring kind of that, then it has to be kind of whole business kind of unit. There has to be a shared responsibility in that. Otherwise, everybody's kind of like, there's a risk that you end up incentivizing the wrong type of kind of behavior, whether that's in sales or success or support or kind of whatever it might be. So I think we have to realize the most important point in all of this sort of stuff is this is a team sport, right? Like service and experience is a team game. And we all have to kind of be focused on the right sort of outcomes, and then everybody has to be rewarded for achieving those outcomes collectively. Because if you stop doing kind of that, then you end up kind of you run the risk that you drive you start building incentives for the wrong type of behavior.
Chris, if I could add to that, I couldn't agree more. And KPIs, particularly when they're attached to bonuses or remuneration, are a horrible, thorny thing that I'm sure many of of our watchers will have experienced, and nobody likes that particular thing to have to do. And really is, there's two aspects to this with regards to KPIs. One is the carrot, and one is the stick. The carrot is that basically people are able to own those numbers, and that's important. Certainly with something like working with something like Freshdesk, and if you had, or any help desk software where you've got the survey technology all in one place, your agents can own their data, which means they're able to be part of the overall success. That's not necessarily saying what they are targeted on, but they're able to be part of that. So that's on the carrot side in terms of understanding what they can do to influence the success of the team and being in control of that. On the stick side, however, I would say that this is where AI is coming in. Because the AI generates scores at what it thinks based on what the person said, those can't be gained. Not unless you've got everybody to say the same thing, which would be tough for anybody. Imagine going into the phone shop, which is, as Adrian gave the example and said, oh, it'd be really nice if you could get a 10. And by the way, could you please write this, and this for me? Because no one's going to do that. So by using the AI has the power here to actually provide some monitoring, some kind of way of saying, look, we're going to keep this fair. We want you to be part of this. And it's about the implementation, certainly, of these kind of KPIs. But it's no good trying to go around it because the AI will get you. so don't bother. Try and be smarter somewhere else. But that's certainly where technology can come in and really help with gaming. Yeah,
great. Marion, I'm going to try and bring you back in. Hopefully we've sorted out your connection. Just in terms of some of the conversations that you've had with clients of your own, is there? Do you see customer scores being sort of regularly connected to incentives, and are businesses that you speak to incentivizing employees based on their CSAT scores?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is most of them are also, like, for instance, I see. I mean, it's not a part of the gaming, but it's also part of something that I'm facing with a lot of customers that are outsourcing their support centers and support resources, basically CSAT or the SLA base. They are using this as a metric in order to score and to monitor the performance of those teams that are outsourced, and yes, like the
well, we were so close there. We've lost Marion again, unfortunately, which is a real shame. It's just always mid-flow, which is extremely frustrating. But I'm going to move on to another audience question. This is the really interesting one from Alex. So thanks, Alex. Alex has said, as opposed to conducting rather bland CSAT and NPS surveys, should we be chasing the poor customer experiences, investigating these, qualifying them, learning from them, and doing things differently accordingly? And similarly, for good experiences, should we value our detractors more than our promoters? So, Adrian, thoughts on that one?
I would say that I completely agree, but I would also go further, because I would say that we shouldn't just we shouldn't lose sight of kind of like our promoters, but we should also pay very, very much attention, very close attention to the people that would score as detractors, let's say, or low on a CSAT sort of score. But I also, I think, go further on that. I would go kind of like into the darkest recesses of kind of businesses and actually chase down the people that actually complain. The formal complaints and also the hidden complaints. And you know what? Because I think that's where we really learn kind of a lot. Because I think that what tends to happen is that we end up understanding, if we're willing to chase those things down, we end up understanding or really learning about what our service and what our experience is like in extremis, almost like under stress or under kind of pressure. And if we chase down those kind of complaints, then those kind of detractors, we learn a lot about it. Problem is, most companies don't do that because they don't see it as valuable work. They also see it as difficult and emotionally kind of uncomfortable work to actually lean into this as somebody who's potentially going, ah, and you look at it and just go, oh, you're like, we're wrong, we're sorry, kind of how can we make this kind of right? And I think that the really kind of like the really resilient and the people that really care about kind of making things kind of better aren't afraid to go into those dark corners and actually with an open mind and an open heart and actually starting to try and learn about what went wrong and why it went wrong, and then trying to learn and build on the back of that. And but I don't see many people actually kind of doing that, because actually, think about it. When was the last time that you heard somebody kind of said, oh, the complaints procedure for this company was wonderful? You never hear that. Wouldn't that be amazing if you did hear that?
Well, absolutely,
maybe,
God, Marion,
maybe at the end of the therapy you do it, but the journey is very hard and difficult. But I think I don't know, as a company, you should not neglect your perspective as well, because I think this is really important that you keep your perspective, but somehow you should also be able to look at the truth in the eyes, and to also face it. It's like going through a therapy. You have like a lot of ideas about who you are and how people are perceiving you or seeing you and so on. And somehow it's like if you had the possibility to really discover how you can be the best version of yourself, you know, and of course it goes through a difficult and sometimes painful process where you have to change processes, you have to also change people's minds and vision where they have like true, I don't know, but true convictions as well. But this is sometimes where you need to go as well in order to go on in the journey and to be really successful. But yeah, I agree with Adrian. I think it's and I can see it sometimes with my clients when we discuss it. They're like, "Whoa, but we were not expecting this," or but then it means that we need to change this. Yeah, and so what? So if we don't, then we don't change it, and we don't change it, and we go straight in the wall, and we say, okay, it was not painful all along the journey, but the result was super painful. And I think this is, yeah, you should see it like as a kind of a therapy about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder whether companies worry that they're asking too much of their customers as well by doing that. Rob, any thoughts on that, Rob? I mean,
if you look at, I mean, research has shown that people tend to respond, as Adrian was saying, emotionally at different ends of the spectrum. You know, there's a big group in the middle that if you just do what you said you did for them, they won't respond. They won't tell you because, well, why should they? You just did what they expected you to do. But you've got the group at the bottom end where you really failed. You know, and that's a degree of failure from just failed to really, really failed. And then there's the group at the top where you did things exceptional. And as Adrian says, and I think Marion put it beautifully in terms of why people don't go there, was if you don't look at those two extremes, you know, how are you ever going to work out how to really shift everybody really? If good looks like shifting everybody into the exceptional, how are you going to do that if you don't look at why people are in those two lower groups? And that's why, you know, there's only one way to work out how to do that, and that's to ask them. But do it in a way that's sensitive to them. You know, they're not going to fill out a 50-page form for you, especially if they're not happy. But, you know, just ask them and do it in a way that recognises their time and the amount of time they're prepared to invest in you, and you know, get that information from them. And then you can use, you know, technology. You know, if you don't want to use the technology, there is there's a utility company in Texas where they have a team of people whose job it is to just read all the feedback. Now, you know, that's not necessarily something we could all have the luxury of. However, they have absolutely, you know, on their customer experience journey, you know, they're really up there and they're doing a fantastic job. But it's because they're taking the time to understand each individual customer and work out where they are on the journey. And as Marion said, you know, if you want to go and stick your head in the sand, then do it. but you're not going to, I think the saying is, then you're not going to see when someone shoots your backside off. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's there's a proverb, ancient proverb in there somewhere.
Well,
Rob, you know, speaking of time, we are fast running out of ours, unfortunately. But I really think there's one final question from the audience that I think would be a good wrap-up question. So we'll ask that, and you know, hopefully you guys have got some interesting opinions on this as the last question. But Lucy mentioned that she really liked Adrian's point about telling stories, not numbers, and was hoping that we might be able to expand on that. And I think this is a really good point because this spans, you know, the whole internal requirements about customer scores is about actually being able to tell more of a story to employees and customers. So guys, you know, again, if you want to put your hand up, or I can ask, maybe Adrian, we'll start with you. I mean, you know, how do you go about telling like really compelling stories around the feedback that you're receiving, you know, internally and externally to customers too?
Well, I think the first thing is that you actually have to go out and seek the stories. Now, if that means that you physically take the time out to dip in and read the feedback, or you take the time to go and speak to the people, whether it's people either serving the customers or people kind of like, or you actually go to speak to customers yourself, is like stories are born of experience, right? And so to tell better stories, you sometimes have to go and generate that experience. And that's the difference, I think, between data. You can tell a story about data, but it doesn't come down to that specific. It doesn't come down to that Mr. or Mrs. Smith kind of did this, and this is what happened, this is how we responded, and this is how it's made them feel, and this is what they told me, and this is how it made me feel. Because that's the thing where you actually properly latch onto something. And so to tell better stories, we have to go off and almost generate those experiences, whether it's dipping into the data or going out and talking to people or kind of listening. And I think that's the kind of thing. It requires effort on our part.
Yeah. Rob, final point?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In the mind of every customer, they are their own story. And that's every customer is a story. And if you don't take the time to understand their story, then you're never really going to really engage with them at an emotional level. And Adrian just said something which really resonated with me, is how they feel. And you're not going to necessarily get that from a score. It might be a very small indicator, but the only way they're going to understand how they feel is if they tell you. And so you should ask them. Ask them how they feel in a nice, sensitive way, as quickly as possible. And then, there's plenty of opportunity then to sort of get in there and really get in there and read the stories. And pushing my own thing, that the tech can make that so much easier and quicker for you. It's not sifting through spreadsheets of comments. You can dig down and understand things a lot quicker. But yeah, understand how people feel. Personalization is the key. We all know that. And this is where you can really drive things forward and become a superhero.
Great. Well, I'm really sorry that we've run out of time. That's all we've got time for. I think there's so much more that we could go into, and that resonates in the number of questions that we've had from the audience today, and apologies to audience members who haven't managed to get their questions answered. But hopefully this session has been informative regardless. For those of you out there who would like to learn a bit more about this area, well, you can visit MyCustomer for a whole host of content in this area, specifically around the pros and cons of customer scores and success metrics and how to sort of better analyze customer feedback. But please do also take time to visit the links in your dashboard at the bottom there to the Opinyin and Freshworks websites, because both of these sites have some really great resources, some very sort of specific resources in this area, and they have teams on hand as well to sort of personally assist you with any queries about gleaning insight from customer satisfaction surveys and feedback. So plenty more for everyone to read up on, and more insights for everyone to receive, to hopefully help you all with your customer feedback and measurement programs. So I guess with that, it just leaves me to say thanks to our partners at Opinyin and Freshworks, and once again, thanks to our brilliant guests today. Thanks, Rob, Adrian, and Marion. Marion, I'm sorry we weren't able to include you a little bit more throughout the course, but it was great hearing from you all regardless.
Thank you, guys. Sorry about that. Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure being here anyway.
and thanks to the audience. I hope, like I say, the session was interesting and informative, and I trust you'll join us again in the future. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, guys.